At 81, I regret not doing this earlier. It is not about money. It is not about career. It is not about taking bigger risks or chasing grand dreams. It is something much smaller than that, and that is why I ignored it for most of my life. When you are young, you believe the important decisions are the big ones. Which job to take, who to marry, where to live, how much to earn. You think your life will be shaped by dramatic turning points. It is not. Your life is shaped by what you practice every single day. For decades, I practiced distraction. I filled my time with useful things, necessary things, responsible things. I built routines. I stayed busy. I solved problems. I made plans. From the outside, it looked disciplined. Inside, I was avoiding something simple: stillness. I regret not learning how to be still much earlier. Not physically still, mentally still. I did not know how to sit quietly without reaching for noise. I did not know how to reflect without distracting myself. I did not know how to face my own thoughts without immediately looking for a task. Silence made me uncomfortable, so I avoided it. When you avoid silence, you also avoid clarity. When you avoid clarity, you drift. You respond to life instead of choosing it. I spent most of my years reacting. If there was a problem, I handled it. If there was work, I completed it. If there was an obligation, I fulfilled it. What I did not do was pause long enough to ask myself whether the direction I was moving in was actually mine. It is possible to live a very respectable life that does not fully belong to you. That is a painful realization at 81. Stillness is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is awareness. Without it, you repeat patterns automatically. You inherit beliefs without questioning them. You pursue goals without examining why they matter to you. I adopted many ambitions because they sounded correct. They were impressive. They were socially approved. I rarely stopped to ask whether they aligned with my own values. Busyness protected me from that question. When your schedule is full, you never have to confront your dissatisfaction. You can blame exhaustion. You can blame responsibility. You can blame timing. But when you sit quietly, without distraction, something honest surfaces. For most of my life, I ran from that honesty. I thought reflection was indulgent. I thought introspection was unnecessary. I believed that forward motion alone was enough. It is not enough. Without reflection, you may succeed in directions that do not fulfill you. You may maintain relationships that lack depth. You may accumulate achievements that feel strangely hollow. I did all of that. The regret does not come from failure. It comes from misalignment. I regret not asking myself earlier what actually matters to me, not what should matter, not what looks admirable, not what earns approval. What truly matters? That question requires stillness. Stillness forces you to confront uncomfortable truths. It forces you to admit when you are pursuing something out of fear instead of desire. It forces you to acknowledge when you are staying silent to avoid conflict rather than preserve peace. I avoided those confrontations for years. There is a difference between being productive and being purposeful. I was productive. I was rarely purposeful. Purpose demands conscious choice. Conscious choice demands reflection. Reflection demands silence. At 81, silence feels different. It is no longer threatening. It is revealing. When I sit quietly now, memories surface with clarity. Patterns become obvious. I see the decisions I made automatically. I see the times I ignored my instincts. I see the moments when I sensed something was wrong, but pushed forward anyway because momentum was easier than reconsideration. I wish I had paused more often. I wish I had taken even 10 minutes a day to sit without distraction and ask simple questions. What am I feeling? Why am I pursuing this? Is this direction aligned with who I want to become? Those small pauses could have redirected entire years. Instead, I relied on external markers to tell me I was doing well: promotions, praise, stability, structure. None of those replace inner alignment. When you reach 81, the external markers fade. Titles lose importance. Status becomes irrelevant. What remains is the relationship you have with yourself. If you have spent decades avoiding your own thoughts, that relationship feels unfamiliar. Silence can feel heavy when you are not used to it. I am not suggesting that you withdraw from the world. I am suggesting that you do not abandon yourself within it. The habit of constant distraction is praised. People admire productivity. They admire relentless motion. They rarely admire reflection because it is invisible. But reflection shapes everything. In the next part, I will tell you what happened when I finally stopped running from stillness, and why that one shift changed the way I see every year I have left. When I finally allowed myself to sit in silence without immediately reaching for distraction, something unexpected happened. At first, it was uncomfortable. My mind raced. Old memories surfaced. Unfinished conversations replayed themselves. Decisions I had justified years ago suddenly felt questionable. I understood why I had avoided stillness for so long. It removes the noise that protects you from yourself. But once the initial discomfort passed, clarity followed. In that clarity, I began to see patterns that had shaped my life without my permission. I saw how often I said yes when I meant no. I saw how frequently I pursued security over meaning. I saw how many arguments could have been resolved earlier if I had paused long enough to understand my own reactions. Stillness did not give me new information about the world. It gave me accurate information about myself. That is what I regret not accessing earlier. When you live without reflection, you become reactive. You assume your emotions are facts. You assume your impulses are instructions. You move quickly from feeling to action without examining the space in between. That space is powerful. In that space, you can choose differently. You can respond instead of react. You can adjust direction before years accumulate. For most of my life, I skipped that space entirely. I also noticed something else in silence. I began to see how much of my stress had been self-created. I worried about opinions that did not matter. I chased validation from people who were not paying attention. I carried resentment longer than necessary because I never sat long enough to question it. When you do not reflect, you inherit emotional habits automatically. Reflection interrupts those habits. There were relationships in my life that suffered not because of dramatic betrayal, but because of accumulated misunderstanding. I misunderstood myself, so I misunderstood others. I projected fears that I never examined. I interpreted silence as rejection. I interpreted disagreement as disrespect. A few minutes of honest reflection could have softened years of tension. It is difficult to admit that many problems are prolonged by your own lack of awareness. It is easier to blame circumstances, personalities, or timing. Stillness removes those excuses. As I grew older and distractions naturally decreased, I was forced into reflection. Retirement reduces structure, energy shifts, social circles change. Without constant activity, your inner world becomes louder. Some people find that frightening. I did at first. But gradually, I discovered that reflection is not an enemy. It is a compass. When you reflect consistently, you begin to notice what energizes you and what drains you. You notice patterns in your choices. You notice how certain environments affect your mood. You begin to identify what truly matters, not in theory, but in practice. If I had practiced this earlier, I would have made smaller corrections sooner. I would have spent more time with people who aligned with my values and less time chasing approval. I would have expressed gratitude more often instead of assuming people understood it. I would have apologized faster instead of defending pride. Stillness does not erase regret. It reduces future regret. One of the greatest gifts of reflection is perspective. When you pause long enough, you see that many of the things you worried about intensely were temporary. Many conflicts that felt permanent were momentary. Many fears that seemed urgent were imagined. Without reflection, you treat every emotion as an emergency. With reflection, you recognize which emotions deserve action and which deserve patience. At 81, I finally understand that productivity without awareness leads to exhaustion. Achievement without alignment leads to emptiness. Motion without direction leads to regret. Stillness corrects direction. You do not need hours of meditation or isolation from the world. You need honesty. 10 minutes of quiet without a screen, a short walk without headphones. A moment at the end of the day to ask yourself what felt right and what felt wrong. These small acts accumulate. They sharpen your decisions. They clarify your priorities. They strengthen your relationships. If I had begun this practice in my 30s instead of my 70s, entire decades might have felt different. Not necessarily easier, but more intentional. Regret at 81 is not loud. It is subtle. It whispers rather than shouts. It shows up in the recognition that life could have been more aligned with who I truly was. That is why I share this. Do not wait until circumstances force you into stillness. Choose it deliberately. Let silence inform your direction while time is still generous. Because one day, distractions will fade on their own, and you will either meet yourself as a stranger or as someone you have been listening to all along.